случувања и можностите разговарав со амбасадорот Ерван Фуере и веќе неговите ставови. Ambassador, first of all, thank you for joining us. Can you tell me how do you see the current position of the process of EU integration of Macedonia? Is this real?
Well, yesterday it was a very unfortunate and very sad moment in the relations between the European Union and the Western Balkans. And I think it's a failure of leadership on the part of the European Union. They should have prepared for this European Council in a much more comprehensive way. And also it's a failure of the French diplomacy for putting forward a proposal, at least what I saw, which takes almost full account of the Bulgarian position, but ignores the concerns of the Macedonian position. And if one wants to find a compromise solution, it's essential that the concerns and interests of both sides be taken into account. And unfortunately, the Bulgarian position, many of the elements of which go totally against all that the EU stands for, and also ignores judgments of the European Court of Human Rights in the issue of minority rights and the insistence of Bulgaria to include a reference to a Bulgarian community in the Macedonian constitution. So for me, the only solution in this is that of course, it's possible to make a reference in the negotiating framework to the friendship agreement between Bulgaria and North Macedonia, but it should be to the exclusion of all those issues that pertain to history and identity and language that have nothing to do with the accession criteria for EU membership. So these should be excluded because in the way they are currently formulated, they are an insult to Macedonian citizens. They attack the heart and soul of the Macedonian nation. So they could never be part of any compromise solution. And I really would hope that the French diplomatic efforts would understand the sensitivities relating to these issues that exist in the Western Balkans and make an effort that is much more taking account of the Macedonian interests than purely leaning almost entirely in favor of the interests of Bulgaria.
Ambassador, but again today we saw a decision of the Bulgarian parliament who said, okay, we accept this French proposal. A day after the Macedonian side, or the Prime Minister Kovacevski in Brussels said that this is unacceptable for Macedonia. Is this again a sign that says we don't care about the opinion of the Macedonian government? And what after this decision of the Bulgarian parliament, do you expect that the French presidency will give another proposal for Macedonia and Bulgaria, and is this possible?
Well, one would hope so, that they will make another effort. And I think it was a serious mistake and very unfortunate one on the part of French diplomacy to put forward a proposal which would obviously be extremely problematic for one of the parties to this dispute. And if one wants to resolve a bilateral dispute in a manner where there are there's a balanced approach, but taking account of the criteria for EU accession, it's quite clear that the issues relating to language, identity and history must be dealt with in a parallel process, because otherwise including them into the negotiating framework is going to pollute completely the accession process. And who's to guarantee that there won't be further Bulgarian vetoes down the road? So The only solution, in my view, is that those issues I mentioned, history, identity, language, should be dealt with in a parallel process. There can be a reference, of course, in the framework, negotiating framework, to the friendship agreement and other agreements, but to the exclusion of those issues that have nothing to do with the accession process. And I think it's a great disservice to the EU's enlargement agenda that the commissioner responsible for enlargement should actually publicly state that he supports all Bulgarian concerns and that they are part of the accession process. The Commission is, after all, should be the arbiter, the guarantor of the basic principles and values on which European integration is based, and not taking exclusively the side of one member state, a member state which unfortunately is abusing of the veto powers. And again, it's another example of the fact that the unanimity rule has to be addressed, and I would fully support what, for example, the Irish Prime Minister suggested some time ago, which is to eliminate the unanimity rule in matters relating to enlargement, so that we don't have this situation where one country, Bulgaria, is taking hostage the entire European Union and its enlargement agenda.
Is this possible to become reality?
I fear that the way that the European Union works, it won't happen overnight. That's clear. So what is needed is really to bring together those Bulgarian people who, I'm sure there are sensible Bulgarian people who believe that their politicians are not acting in favor of the Bulgarian interests, and that there be a coming together of the people, civil society from Bulgaria, North Macedonia, to create this climate of trust, because at the moment there is no trust. And to have a final, to have an agreement, there needs to be a trust established. And unfortunately, the behavior of a number of Bulgarian politicians is totally contrary to the behavior of one expects from EU member states, and also totally contrary to all that the EU stands for in terms of overcoming the legacy of the past, the heritage of the war, and promoting a process based on reconciliation and the rule of law. Bulgaria seems to ignore that entirely, and this is a great tragedy in my view.
Yes, Ambassador, few days till the ending of the French presidency. If there is no step further in these days, do you expect that the European Union should think once again who will be the part in charge for the negotiations between the two countries, Macedonia and Bulgaria, since you have very big concern about the role of the Commissioner Varhey, and is it important who is the one in charge in the process?
Of course, it's not just one individual that determines the process. It's a whole institutional setup, and there is the High Representative, Mr. Josep Borrell, and there's the President of the Commission, who I think herself is very much supportive of the Western Balkans, and so they need to take the responsibility. It should not be exclusively the responsibility of the presidency. As we have seen, the French presidency has failed in its efforts, and it shouldn't. If it had done its homework properly and understood the sensitivities that exist in the Western Balkan region with regard to history, identity, etc., this would not have happened. So we really do need a confluence of leaders who understand those sensitivities. Now it will be the Czech presidency, and perhaps they will be more successful in putting forward a much more comprehensive approach in addressing all these bilateral disputes, of which the Bulgarian-Macedonian dispute is only one. There are many others down the road that would have to be dealt with, and we need to avoid every time that we have this deadlock which undermines completely the trust in the European Union's capacity to deal with these issues and to promote an enlargement policy which, after all, has been promised for so many years to the Western Balkan countries.
Ambassador, what do you think about the disappointment of the people in Macedonia, and what would be your message to the Macedonian people?
Well, I can well understand the tremendous frustration and the disappointment of Macedonian citizens, not only at the failure of the EU leadership, but also at the insults that are being thrown at them by their neighbour in a manner which is totally at variance with all that the EU integration process stands for. So, but at the same time, as we've seen in other conflicts, for example, in my own country, Ireland, with Britain, we just had to sit down together and find solutions based on trust. And there are still issues of history between us and the UK, but they are addressed in a very cooperative manner. It's not a colonial power acting against a former colony like Bulgaria is acting in its behavior. They're acting as a colonial power. They seem to have forgotten that they are part of the European Union. So there needs to be an environment much more conducive to finding those, a narrative which understands the sensitivities on both sides and find a common agreement within the European integration context. And that's where I emphasize the critical importance of civil society organizations who can come together, as we saw in Northern Ireland between the Unionists and the Republicans, coming together to create this climate of understanding and of moving together forward for the common good of the citizens. So, of course, North Macedonia must also continue with its reforms. It has made tremendous efforts, and while I understand the demotivation of many, I think the best response to what is happening is to continue and to show that the Macedonian citizens have the capacity, have the determination to continue in their efforts, because they firmly believe, rightly so, that their future lies in the European family of nations.
Ambassador, thank you very much.